Hey guys, Caleb here, back again with more Red Knot, and today we are reading Book 5 of the Legend of Vanks Malik series, Trigon Daze, by M.R. Mathias. The cover to this one looks alright, certainly better than the last one, as we have a short-necked dragon thing and a dude riding a dragon with like a magic staff. And then we got more dragons in the background. This one dude looks like he's wielding a lightsaber and some other guy with a lightsaber. There's another dragon in the background like torching a castle or a city or something. And there is fire everywhere and a bunch of dudes with lightsabers there at the bottom. And overall, it's okay. A little simple for the background with the exception of the dragon in the center, but it's okay. And once again, I don't have a synopsis, so I cannot read that for you. So let's just go. Chapter 1. There once was a man named Mitty, who liked to dance a ditty. His suspenders broke, and it twarn't no joke, 'cause the man didn't own any skivvies. A festival song. It's going to be more of this kind of humor, isn't it? Vanks picked up a piece of broken glass from the floor of the Horror Witch's dirty old lookout room. A tiny flash of movement had drawn him to it, and now he was trembling. It turned out that the mirror of portent wasn't a complete loss. After all, in the palm-sized fragment, he saw ships crashing into docks and unloading their cargo of black armored soldiers. Blades glowing blue, much like Shelda's, flared forth. Winged creatures with eyes the same dull shade swarmed the air. Some were carrying men, some not. The surprised people trying to defend themselves were decimated. The city under attack was in flames. So basically the cover of the book. His first concern was that it was the Isle of Zith being ravaged, but he soon saw that it wasn't. It wasn't Orden either. From the structural style of the buildings and the lack of ice and snow, he guessed it was either Peridon Isle or right across the channel at the mainland city of Adwin. Vanks remembered how the Horror Witch had once made him question a deed into the mirror with his will. Once made him question a deed into the mirror with his will. So you're asking the mirror to show you something by sheer will rather than just actually saying it? It's clunky and it's confusing and you need to fix it. It would display the myriad possibilities that opened up from the intended action. In this case, though, Vanks found that every time he tried, he was led back to the same blurry future. Then it occurred to him that he didn't know how far into the future this was happening. Just then Sir Poopsalot came sauntering into the room. The dog came over and nuzzled Vanks. As he did, Vanks felt one of the many strange sensations that his dog familiar often sent him. "That is true, Poops," Vanks responded aloud, and then laughed through his concern for doing so. Laughed through his concern? Think we need to go back and look over this, 'cause it doesn't make any sense. He could have answered with a thought. So you're laughing at yourself because you could have just told him with your mind instead of talking aloud to him. Does it really matter? He'd sworn to the goddess to avoid questioning the Horror Witch personally, and he wouldn't break his word. Instead, he called for Galarel through the crystal hanging at his neck. The device allowed him to order the Horror Witch's minions about St. Elm's Deep. He could also communicate with any of the Fae and his companions just as long as they were near the Heart Tree. Gal arrived a few long moments later, and shifted from her panther-like changeling form into the smiling Princess Vanks remembered. Her hair was dark now, and though it framed her delicate face peacefully, she still thought he would like it better long and golden, as it had been when he'd first started seeing her mother. Were you shagging her mom? The queen? I'm pretty sure that's not okay, considering, you've said multiple times last book that the king existed and there was a prince. Thinking of the Duchess of Highlake made him shiver. In a good way? In a bad way? It's really ambiguous here. I'm not sure what you mean, but it leads me to think perverted things. Shelda and Moonsey are as in love as any two have ever been, said Garlel, for, just meeting within, the last day or so. I'm not sure how it works, though, since Shell is 7 feet tall and Moonsey is only 2.5. She chuckled, and then grew serious when she looked at Vanx's expression. What is it? I need you to find out from Assyria Rhyme how to tell how far into the future her mirror of portent is seeing. I thought it was destroyed. Look! Vanx showed her the piece of a mirror he'd found. She watched it for a few moments, then looked at him. Oh my, that's Pyrdon Isle. I can tell by the seawall. I'll go down then. She gave him an understanding nod. That night Vanx listened with mixed feelings as the old hag hollered and pleaded for death, while Garlel tortured information out of her with threats, offers to end her, and a good sharp stick. The good guys are turning into pretty much as bad as the villains. One of the horror witch's own creations, a large venomous spider-like thing called Sissy, had cocooned her and was using her as a feeding pod. Ariska Rhyme wouldn't die in the state, but oh, how she wanted to. So suddenly we're going to her perspective for this? Gee, thanks. Switching perspectives at random. The next day, Vanx concocted the brew the old witch told Gloria how to make. After sipping it, and then touching a certain powder to his tongue, when he looked into the mirror, Vanx suddenly understood that the vision was of a very near future. He also saw a tangent vision of things that would transpire in only days. Prince Russet and the crew of the Seahawk would be landing at Orden, where they would trick Darbon out of information and then hire the twin Eskimos. So basically you just took Eskimos and then mixed the words around. Clever, you are not. Hire the twin Eskimos, Idna and Anda, to guide them to the deep in search of, I hate this character's name, Galarel. Vanx shook his head. The reflection started blurring in his mind, and he retched. He needed more of the potion, but had seen enough for the moment. Galarel was an abscond princess, after all, but if Prince Russet was coming to Orden, then he had a good idea of where she was. The letter they'd sent back with Brody's remains might have given them away, or more likely the dock workers had been questioned by kingdom spies. Vanx and his group were revered as celebrities after their saber-shrew kill, and even before that, the sign in front of the Iceberg Inn and Tavern had read, "Vanx the Bard, most nights after supper," for much of a year. Had anyone been asking about him, they would have learned he had gone questing to the north, and that he had taken his dead friend's sister, a girl named Glara, with him. Well, this information would have been useful in the first book I read, but whatever. It also meant that the kingdom was not expecting an attack. Had they been, Prince Russet would have been forced into a stronghold and kept there. He was King Orcam's only son, and there was no way they'd let him sail north. For a moment, the little rat-riding devil, Powuk, crossed Vanx's mind, but then the fresh memory of the Prince Russet's angry expression as he roughed up Darbon wiped the concern away. Selma looked battered in the vision, too, and that made Vanx angry. Why would he harm Selma or Darbon? Vanx asked Galeriel some time later. They were in a crystal-formed hall that Vanx had cleaned of filth and debris. Now this is spelt Debris, and I want to say that's the correct spelling, but it's just pronounced debris. I'm not 100% sure on this, because my grammar sucks, so does my spelling, but there you have it. Galariel hung some old tapestries and replaced the torches with moss lamps she got from the underground brownies. There were 2 divans sitting opposite each other, with a long wooden table between them. The table was knee-high for Vanks and Galariel, but Thorn had brought over a little chair and looked to be sitting at the head of the fancy table board as the conversation continued. They were probably trying to keep their mouths shut, Thorn answered. Before the Pixie Queen had died, the strawberry-haired elf was the head of her honor guard. General Foxwise Poseythorn was his name and title, and though he looked like a child, he was as sharp and ornery as an elf could be. I don't think he looked like a child in the last book. It was never really said. Finding a runaway princess is serious business, I'm sure. I'm not a runaway princess, Galariel snapped, and a little of her feline changeling self resonated in her snarl. Well, thank goodness we get a little bit of description of what she actually looks like when she changes. Because last book, it was just kind of like, yeah, she's got like black skin, and we're not really going to call them claws, they're just nails and stuff. Yeah, she looks scary. I don't know why he would hurt them either. I'm sick about it. I didn't know I was the Princess of Trigon, and that he was my brother, until recently, Vanks. Don't ask me why he would do anything. You are the Princess of High Lake, either way. Your mother won't let the realm sit still until you are found. You'll have to go to Orindon and head him off, gal, Thorn said simply. We can't have the Crown Prince of Trigon bringing his whole cohort into the deep to find us. Why? Why? What of the attack on the island? Vanks asked the general. She can warn the prince when she sees him, the elf shrugged. You're helpful, asshole. Chapter 2. A boy made of stone upon a great worm cast the shadows across them all, as they tore apart the walls. The tyrant, God Ragrin, tried his best to get away, but his own slaves turned him in after cutting off his balls. Battle of Ornspike, because the author thinks he's clever by throwing that in. There's really no actual point to these little quotes he begins the chapters with. They're just pointless. I wish I could go with you, gal, Shelda said, gathering Galariel's full attention. I don't know why she had to gather it when, speaking to her would bring her attention to her. The 2 of them were sitting on a large rock at the edge of the Heart Tree's Shadowmane. Outside of the Underland, Shelda could go no farther from the tree until the newly born prince, Cheval Longroot. Did he give his name? Was he christened that? Is existence coming to a thing? Where did he get this name from? Okay. Matured and learned a way to release her. That could be half a century or more. Galariel wasn't sure how Shelda kept from going mad, but at least she wouldn't age while she waited. Shelda and Moonsey seemed to be in love. Okay, first you said they are in love, now you're saying they seem to be in love. Which is it? And happy about it, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Either way, she could travel 5 times as fast as Shelda if she made the journey in her changeling form. She wasn't going alone, though. A little sprite named Streak had been assigned by Vanks and General Poseythorn to accompany her. Streak could fly even faster than she could run, and the finger-sized little guy could ride in her hair or easily hide if the need arose. I wish you could go too, Shell. Gal forced a smile. I mean, so you could get away from here, but none of you could hold my pace. I bet Moonsey. Shelda caught herself and blushed. Not even your beloved First Captain Gloryvine Moonseed could keep my pace. Galariel stood and patted her big Gargan friend on the back. Even that little turd Streak will have a time of it on his trek. That's a great way to insult your guide, and your help, and your friend. I'm sure that Streak appreciates it. In fact, that character's gonna give you a middle finger and go back to his home. Because you're a dick. You'd best use caution. Shelda stood and looked down at her. I saw a slip of a girl fall through ice that a whole caravan had just crossed over. Just like that. She disappeared down a hole. That's terrible. She was usually eaten up with curiosity about the Underland. She loved the stories Shelda and the fairies told her, but this day's concern over Darbon, Salma, and an angry brother she barely knew kept her from asking questions. It is true, and you better not just go running across any open tundra. There's more than snowfall and shrew tunnels you have to worry about out there. Wouldn't she fucking know this? She ripped apart wolves in the last book. Why are you warning her about this shit now? I'll be fine, Shelda. Galariel gave her a quick hug. I have to go gather my things. So, you are going in the morning? Vanks and Thorn are escorting me to the ice falls in a while. I'll slide around them at first light and be off. Shelda grabbed Galariel into another, more heartfelt embrace and sniffed loudly. I'll miss you. The way you and Moonsey extended the shadow mane for me was the nicest thing ever done. In the world, for you particularly, that's a vague sentence. You are one of the truest friends I've known. I'll miss you too, Shelda. Galariel hugged her back, but didn't feel as emotional. Shelda could only survive inside the area of land the Heartstree shadow had touched, and in the Underland. Galariel and Captain Moonseed had used a giant mirror Galariel had found in the Crystal Palace. With it, and with the help of an extra tall living tree, they'd made rounds around the Heartstree at different elevations and distances. They used the sun's reflection to create a far greater area of shadow around the tree that Shelda could safely roam. I don't remember this being mentioned in the last book. Right now, though, Galariel was too full of concern to worry about any of it, and growing eager to be back in her changeling form. She gave her Gargan friend a final hug, and then went about finishing her preparations. Vanks was busy. He ordered Brooch and the remaining members of his pack of wolves to scare away any living things that might slow or harm Galariel as she traversed her way south out of the lower forest. After that, he needed to add the final ingredients to the potion he was rendering for Streak. The mixture would supposedly allow the sprite to call out to him from afar if there was a dire situation. The trick after the concoction was done brewing was diluting it so that the tiny little guy didn't die when he took a sip. Vanks hoped to test it, but before he could do that, he had to pen a message for King Ravier Oakarm and another for Quasar, whoever that is. Both, he knew, would take a while to articulate. It made him cringe when he pinched a bit of powdered pixie dust from a small cup and sprinkled it into the kettle. He had no taste for this sort of witchery, but it was what he had to work with at the moment, and he was trying to make the best of it. Okay, they glow and sparkle. Do they leave a trail of pixie dust? Do you have to kill and, burn them up and crush them? I mean, what's distasteful about this? You have to explain to me why this is distasteful. He was troubled by Galariel's lack of concern over her journey, too, but the memory of the night in an alley when she could have killed him a dozen times over kept that worry from getting out of hand. He decided he would go review the scene in the mirror again. He wouldn't let Gal leave the deep until he did. Chapter 3. On that old barrel keg, underneath the granted shade, I sit with that old cat, and watch time slip away. Praden cobbles. What if he doesn't listen? Galariel asked. Then tell him in a way he can't help but understand. This came from Thorn. Banks had half a mind to harness Poops and go with her, but knew it would be foolish. He was starting to think he might need to use a spell to get there, or to prey on Isle more directly. He'd read about them in the volumes he'd found in the old crone's potion rooms. If he could warn King Oakarm before the attack, maybe they could change the outcome the mirror kept showing him. He was debating a question he needed the Horror Witch to answer, but Gariel was suddenly hugging him. "I will be in Orden in 2 days, 3 at the most, Banks." She held him back by his shoulders and squeezed her grip, using her true strength. This reminded Banks what she was truly capable of. "If you won't go directly to Pydon, you must," said Banks. "There isn't time to spare. He will go to warn our father and the kingdom, but I will return here. If you run into any trouble, you have Shriek. Get us," Thorn said, and gave her leg a hug. Banks wasn't sure, but he thought he heard the elf sniffle. "I'm sure he cares, considering how much of a perv he is." "I've got this, sir," said a tiny voice that sounded far larger than the dragonfly-sized sprite from which it came. Streak looked like a mop-haired young man, in miniature. He had glassine wings and a cocksure attitude. He came to hover a few feet in front of Banks. "Did you test the potion?" Streak asked. Banks shook his head in the negative. "But it has been diluted to its minimal consistency. If I thin it any more, it definitely won't work. Give me a drop, then, and I will fly ahead and see," requested the diminutive creature. Banks gave Galariel a small vial. She poured a dollop of the liquid into Shriek's tiny canteen. The sprite then took the stoppered nutshell back and zipped away through the trees, going south. "How far do you think you will go?" Thorn asked. "Why, do you have a rendezvous or something to attend?" Galariel joked. "I have to practice with Sir Poopsalot Maximus." "We are getting very good." Thorn's tone was indignant. "Practice what?" Banks chuckled. It was the first time he could remember having a happy thought in some time, but he was immediately put back in his sour mood when he observed Galariel shoulder her satchel. Watching Poops do fancy riding maneuvers with Thorn, saddled on his back, was sometimes pretty funny, but knowing that he may not ever see Galariel again, suppressed those thoughts like a heavy boot squashing a bug. "I guess it didn't work," Thorn said. "You didn't hear him call out, did you?" "I have to go either way." Galariel gave Banks another quick hug and made to run, but Shriek's voice, thundering through the whole of St. Elm's Deep, kept her from her start. "I guess it works, then," she said, rubbing her ears. "That hurt." "You've a young gray bear approaching from the mountain pass," Streak continued in a booming voice that was causing everyone and everything to stir. "We will handle that, gal." Banks gave her another hug. "Be safe, and tell that little turd to only use that potion if the situation is worthy of alarming the entire world." "Stop calling it a turd. It's a... Why am I even trying? The author doesn't care." "I will on both accounts." Galariel hugged him back, then stooped down and gave Thorin a final hug. "Where's Poops?" Galariel looked sad that he wasn't there. "Sleeping," Banks shrugged. "Make sure your brother delivers those scrolls to your father and Quasar." "I will," Galariel said, and then she leapt headlong onto her hands, which were no longer hands but paws. Her body was long and sleek like a big panther, and she was gone from their sight in a matter of seconds. Wait, hold on. In the last book, granted it was highly vague, but they didn't say anything about her physically changing into an actual panther thing. It didn't call her feline, it didn't call her a panther, it didn't do anything. Her skin color changed, and that was about really the only description you had, with the exception of her nails were like claws, but it didn't even call her nails that, it just said her nails. It didn't tell us anything about her actually shape-shifting into a panther, it just said she was a changeling. Want to wake the pooch and go see about the bear? Thanks asked Thorn. There ain't no bears up here, the elf answered, not this time of year. Exactly. After Poops and Thorn were off to see why a bear had strayed so close to the deep, Banks looked into the mirror again. When Galleria left, he felt as if the future might have changed, and he watched on with hope in his heart. This time, when he peered into the broken piece of mirror of portent, he saw more than just Padonda Isle being assailed by the mysterious blue-eyed warriors. Flotsam Bay was being attacked too. The men, or man-like fighters, were all covered in form-fitting, flat black armor that might have been made from dragon skin, or more likely the skin of the stunted, dragon-like beast some of them rode. There was one warrior who was different, though. He wore a blue robe over shinier black armor, and rode on the back of a larger black-scaled dragon, which was so dark as to almost seem purple. No, if it's a black dragon, he wouldn't seem purple at all, unless he was actually a very dark purple. He also wore a lightly glowing metal skull cap, and bore a staff topped with a blue crystal. His eyes suddenly met Thanks, and the scene in the glass glimmered away. So is he aware that you can see this? Pain shot up Vince's arm, for the edge of the glass had sliced him, and he was suddenly aware that something out there was now aware of him, of St. Elm's Deep. Banks wanted Thorn and Poops back as soon as possible, for he was going to Zith, one way or another. He wanted to take Shelda and Moonsey too, but Shelda couldn't leave the Shadow Main. Obviously, thanks for reiterating this constantly. Distraught and angry beyond measure over seeing the Zythans being slaughtered by some evil horde, he decided he would visit the Hoar Witch, even though your goddess said that was a bad idea. The whole point behind him not questioning her was to avoid losing the darker side of him, but seeing Zith attack demanded his darker side, and he wasted no time finding his way down into the dungeon to see her. Well, at least that went much quicker than the last story did. I cannot recommend this at all. In fact, I'm going to say at this point I can't recommend the series at all. It's bland, it's uninteresting, and the lore is changing a bit for really no reason. It's okay that we had the spoilers for the last book, that we had the big fight at the end, even though it was disjointed and different things were going on and a lot of things didn't make sense that were happening, though they tried to make sense. And it's okay to skip some time to show that how things are now. But I don't recall anything about the witch being thrown in a dungeon or anything like that. Or that now Dude is in charge for some reason. I don't get this. The characters still haven't really been described. We still don't really have a character for the characters. The characters are assholes. They are assholes to each other. And the humor is in the toilet. Again, if you are 16 and up, I'm dare say now, if you are 15 and 14 and up, you are not going to like this book. There are better things for you to read. Everything I said about last book, it's important to this book. Don't get this, don't read it, and don't bother with the series. This has been Red Knot. Thank you for listening. Bye!